There has been mixed reactions following the CBN's introduction of the revised cash withdrawal limits on December 6, 2022, following its recent currency redesign project. While some regard the initiative as a political witch hunt, others have applauded it as a strategic move towards addressing the endemic issues of corruption in the system and a step in the right direction in responding to security challenges bedeviling the country, as well as a commendable initiative towards helping the country to achieve its cashless policy targets and formalizing the huge informal sector, amongst other benefits. While the new directive could be both well for tackling illicit transactions and improving the payments ecosystem, it might also have some adverse effects, including potential inconvenience for individuals and organizations with high cash transaction needs, limited infrastructure to support digital payments, among others. Let's get talking with my guest who has the knowledge of all of this. He's an investment strategy manager with Afri Invest West Africa, Mr. Temitope Omoshuyi. Thank you so much and compliments of the season to you.
Thank you for having me.
And also congratulations. We'll talk about that later. Well, cashless policy trap between fraud and failed transactions. Government or the CBN is pushing for us to get included, get into the banking system. But some guys are there working to also discourage Nigerians from embracing the system. What is your take with regards to this?
Thank you very much for that question. It's obvious that whatever programs, policies, government put in place to address specific challenges in the economy, right, you would always have sabotage, you would always have people that work against it. So it's not so strange. That does not mean, the cashless policy that began in 2012, when it was introduced in April, particularly in Lagos, as a pilot state, had not achieved, to some extent, the objective, it was set to achieve. So, obviously, we know that the twin problem of the failed transaction and fraud, have been a major problem with people that are included in the financial system, So we have two categories of or group of people we want to address, right?
Yes.
People that are already banked, they are the one grappling with failed transaction and fraud cases. And we also have the unbanked that the CBN is looking at bringing into the financial system to achieve the 80% financial inclusion target. So really, I think if you look at what has happened since the inception of the cashless policy strategy in 2012, and about 5 other states were included in 2013, and it became a nationwide policy, monetary policy, in 2019. So if you look at what has happened between this period and now, it's quite obvious that yes, cashless policy has really achieved, to some extent, its objective. Okay. However, there are drawbacks that are actually outside the purview of the Monetary Policy Authority. For instance, if you look at just payment platforms or types of, payment platforms, if you look at the transfer, look at online banking, if you look at ATM, they've grown astronomically despite, despite the challenges of fraud and failed transaction. They've grown significantly, and we even saw that in 2020 because people could not move around. They were able to embrace technology to facilitate, transaction. And in fact, if you look at the broad objective of the central bank, which is price stability and financial system stability. For the price stability, you may say, well, because of high level of inflation, what we are seeing now, maybe the policy has not in any way enhanced price stability. But in terms of financial system stability, which has to do with the, the financial institution, and when you go by this popular approach, it's called CAMEL. The CAMEL approach is that you are looking at capital adequacy, asset quality, management, sensitivity, liquidity of banks, and sensitivity to risk. If you look at all of those, e-transaction, electronic transaction has contributed significantly to bank revenue. And bank revenue would dovetail into their capital adequacy, would dovetail into their profitability. And if you look at what is even happening in bank, you look at recently their NPL, non-performing loan, that process or that measures asset quality is not as bad as what we saw when economic recession hit Nigeria in 2016. Then it was over 15%, above the 5% threshold, but now it's hovering around the 5-6%, which shows that to a large extent, cashless policy, among other policies by the CBN, has actually enhanced financial soundness, in Nigeria. But then I think the drawback would be that people that are within the banking sector are still grappling with what we just mentioned. And as a matter of fact, the FITC report on fraud and forgeries in the banking sector actually alluded to the fact that it has grown significantly. As a matter of fact, in the first quarter of this year, about 14 billion was, according to the size of the banking fraud in first quarter was about 14 billion, and about 10% of those fraud was successful. 10% of them. So people lost about 1 billion. In second quarter, we saw it at about 8.9 billion. And this time again, 15% of that was successful. That is, the fraudsters were able to, take away about 1 billion. And if you look at those, are just the size of banking, fraud in the banking sector. But if you look at the largest chunk of that fraud has to do with the e-banking platform, has to do with web, ATMs and all that. So about 70 to 75% is within the is within those e-platform that is in place to enhance cashless policy and to also enhance financial inclusion. So as much as yes, the Monetary Policy Authority may have achieved a feat when it comes to financial inclusion, when it comes to cashless policy, but then you cannot, it's typical of every system. Whenever there's innovation, you will see, distractors who always create innovative ways to impair the system. That's exactly what we are seeing. And you will agree with me that if you look at home theft, when people will come to household to steal cash and all that, it has reduced substantially because people don't keep cash. So we can't deny that fact. Although we know that they've now developed innovative ways, they use POS, ATMs, and other mediums. So I think that's on the one hand. But when you look at the financial sector, the players as well, in terms of the efficiency of product and services, even though it has improved, but there's still a long way to go. Because recently we had a number of complaints that some reputable banks, their apps are not working.
That's where I'm going to, especially this season, and I'm sure I was even affected, and I'm sure many Nigerians were affected. Many could not get cash from ATMs. Many could not do online transfers. Some transfer went off, and the issue of being debited and the person not receiving the payment was everywhere. I kept getting calls and messages. What is the infrastructure level? That is what I'm saying. How do we push this when we are going to, at the end of January, we expect that we are going to institute this new policy?
So I think, the bank has to just, commercial banks, particularly because they have the largest customer and deposit, they have to intensify effort in terms of, addressing these problems.
Yes.
However, like I said, there are limitations to financial inclusion in Nigeria. For instance, I selected, some countries in terms of cashless, economy. One typical or characteristics of these countries or these economies is that all those countries, close to 100% of their population is financially included. Secondly, close to 100% of these countries have access to electricity. Thirdly, close to 100% of the population have access to the internet. You and I know what is happening. If, as a matter of fact, last one is that close to 100% of this country's population is literate. In Nigeria, literacy rate is 77% compared to all these countries, the country like China, New Zealand, Sweden, and a number of other countries. So the limitation of the CBN would be the structure of the Nigerian economy or the challenges of this economy that is, largely outside the purview of the central bank. So how does the central bank install or extend electricity access to urban, rural areas? How would they give access, to people in terms of having access to the internet? In fact, they cannot even afford a phone. They can't afford a phone, let alone, having to use the e-banking system. So, funnily, in some northern states, you have to climb on top of trees, go to high mountain, and all of this to get services. So how do you? The limitation, we know that yes, the CBN is pushing, but it will get to a point whereby the CBN could push and it will cause pain, because it will cause pain on the masses, because factors that are affecting financial inclusion, factors that are affecting the objective of this cashless policy are really outside of people. In fact, one thing with customer, one thing with Nigerians or any, human being, once you find something attractive, seamless, efficient, you will embrace it. You don't need to be told to download a mobile app. You don't need to be told to use the ATM if you think it's seamless. People gravitate towards what they find efficient, and is seamless. So if we force people to use, certain things or certain structure or a platform, and they don't have access to it, in those areas, urban areas, rural area, beg your pardon, they will definitely struggle to be included in the financial system. So on the one hand, the financial sector players, the banks should improve on their, on their e-system. I know that there's this exodus of tech, experts in Nigeria, because of the current economic challenges. Some banks are grappling with, the know-how, because they are not able to retain talent and all that. But definitely, they have to prioritize it because, the world is going digitalized,
yeah.
and they just have to go that route. But for the financially excluded, the current policy may not really augur well with them because of their typical challenges. For instance, if you look at the EFINA report on financial inclusion, they asked question on why the financially excluded, why they did not want to come into the financial system. The number one response, the topmost of that response was that they don't have regular income. The second one is no job. The third one is that the income is even low. And the fourth one will be access to bank. And look at recently, we heard that a number of banks have started closing down their branches in certain areas because they cannot really cope with the current energy crisis, diesel to power their banks and all that. They cannot
reduce hours of operations.
Operations. So that is totally against financial inclusion. So really, what is affecting is actually beyond the CBN. Fiscal authority has to address Nigeria economy, the structure of the economy. More than 50%, about 50% informal sector, infrastructure, access to electricity. So I think so that we don't put the cart before the horse. Development should precede all of these. Are just the characteristics of development.
Interesting point you made there, I must tell you, Mr. Moshe, and as usual, you're always on point on issues like this. But what about the banks that give deadlines? Oh, this will be reverted in 24 hours. This will be reverted in 3 working days, 4 working days. And at the end of the day, people keep going to these banks a week, 2 weeks at times. Some will tell you experience of like a month. And nothing happens. And at the end of the day, some have to go to the social media, pull these banks out, and it's sorted almost immediately. What do you think should be done so that you make sure that they stand by what is correct? Okay, this is what we'll do. This is what will happen. If it won't happen, let the client or customer know that this would not happen. It's like they're taking advantage of the customers.
Yes, you are very right. A couple of people have expressed that. And in fact, the CBN stated clearly in 2020 that when you have ATM withdrawal problem, it should be resolved within 24 hours. If it's for another bank, it should be resolved within 48 hours. And if it is the problem is with POS or other e-banking platform, it should be resolved within 72 hours. But in Nigeria, that that is not this case on the street. You even have 1 week, 1 month, and all that. So I think the bank, have to just come up to speed. But most times, I think, in fact, the onions lies on the central bank to ensure that the most effective channel now is social media. I think the CBN has to now create another social media platform that people can put their complaints so that whenever it exceeds that particular time, the CBN should sanction the commercial bank. If they are able to pay, if there's a flat rate to say that you are paying 50K, 100K to the customer for the delay, I'm telling you, everybody will come up to speed. Because if it's just 5K that was deducted from your account or the error was 5K and the bank is to pay you 50K, they will come up to speed immediately because if you net it, it's a loss on them. So I think it's high time, the Monetary Policy Authority come up to speed because private sector, right, will always do what is comfortable for them, will always want to not pay attention to certain things, especially if regulators don't act. Because what would they lose? Because, if you look at the Nigerian banking sector, I would say it, in a way, it is concentrated. You have just very few banks. So they know that at some point, you still have to remain with certain banks. In fact, you cannot even, despite those challenges, some people are not comfortable with the, just the new banks. They are still not comfortable.
Yes.
They know that you still remain with them directly or indirectly. In fact, some of them even have some of the fintech you think we are using. So indirectly, you're still using those banks. So if the central bank does not come into, into this whole picture, things will not change because they know that, okay, the big guys or the big client will still do business with them. So I think the onions lies on the CBN to act very fast. Otherwise, it will get to a point where it will create, lack of confidence in the financial system. And the only important factor that keeps any financial system moving is trust. Right now, you think you have 1 billion or 1 million or what you have in your account, you think it's there because you trust the bank. It's not that you have the money on you.
Yes.
It's trust. So everything's all about trust.
An interesting conversation. I wish we had more time to talk about this, because this is really interesting and it's human angle. But this is what time can take. I guess we'll have time to talk about this in the new year. And I wish Mr. Temitope happy married life. Congratulations. It's good to have you after your event. So I've been speaking to Mr. Temitope Omoshu. He's a friend of the house. He's an investment strategy manager with AfriInvest West Africa. Thank you so much. Compliments of the season.
Thank you.
I hope to see you again in the new year.
Very well.